The wealthy businessman at table 12 had been berating waitress Maria Santos for 20 minutes straight. First, her accent was too thick. Then her service was too slow. Now her very presence seemed to offend him. Other customers watched uncomfortably as Maria stood there taking abuse she didn't deserve, her hands shaking as she tried to maintain her professional smile. That's when Katt Williams decided he'd heard enough and delivered a lesson about respect that silenced the entire restaurant. Welcome to Visionary Story. Before we begin this story of dignity, cruelty, and the courage to speak up when others stay silent, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this need to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us make sure they are. Romano's Italian restaurant in downtown Phoenix was known for two things: exceptional food and impeccable service. The dimly lit dining room, with its exposed brick walls and warm amber lighting, had been serving the city's business district for over 15 years. It was the kind of place where deals were made over osso buco, where celebrations were marked with carefully selected wine pairings, and where the staff prided themselves on making every guest feel like family. On this particular Thursday evening, the restaurant was moderately busy with the usual mix of business dinners, date nights, and families celebrating special occasions. Katt Williams sat alone at a corner table, grateful for the relative anonymity the subdued lighting provided. He'd just finished a meeting with his tour manager about upcoming West Coast dates and had decided to treat himself to a quiet dinner before heading back to his hotel. He'd been to Romano several times over the years, and the food was consistently excellent, but what he appreciated most was the service: professional, attentive, but never intrusive. The staff had a way of anticipating needs without hovering, of being present when needed and invisible when not. His waitress tonight was Maria Santos, a woman in her late 20s, with kind eyes and a genuine smile that suggested she actually enjoyed her work. She'd served him before during previous visits to Phoenix, and Katt appreciated her attention to detail and her ability to make recommendations without being pushy. "Good evening, Mr. Williams," Maria had said when she first approached his table, her slight accent adding warmth to her greeting. "It's nice to see you again. Can I start you with something to drink?" "Just water for now, and thank you for remembering me," Katt had replied. "I'm still deciding between the veal and the salmon. Both are excellent tonight," Maria had said. "The veal comes with a mushroom risotto that our chef made fresh this afternoon, and the salmon has a lemon herb crust that pairs beautifully with our house Sauvignon Blanc." It was exactly the kind of knowledgeable, helpful service that made Romano stand out from other restaurants in the area. But about 10 minutes after Maria had taken his order, Katt began to notice a commotion at table 12, located in the center of the dining room. A man in an expensive navy suit was speaking loudly enough that his voice carried across the restaurant, though at first Katt couldn't make out the specific words. The man appeared to be in his 50s, with silver hair perfectly styled and the kind of confident posture that suggested he was used to being the most important person in any room. He wore a Rolex that caught the light when he gestured, and everything about his appearance screamed wealth and status. Seated across from him was a woman who seemed to be his business associate or client, though she appeared increasingly uncomfortable as the conversation progressed. As Katt's attention focused on the situation, the man's voice became clearer, and what he heard made his jaw tighten. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," the businessman was saying to Maria, who was standing beside his table with her order pad. "I specifically asked for no ice in my water, and you brought me water with ice. Do you not understand English? Or are you just not paying attention?" Maria's response was polite and professional. "I apologize, sir. I'll bring you a fresh glass right away." "You apologize, but this is the third mistake you've made tonight," the man continued, his voice getting louder. "First, you brought bread without asking if we wanted it. Then you didn't know the wine list well enough to make a proper recommendation. Now I'm starting to wonder if this restaurant hires people based on qualifications or just because they're willing to work for minimum wage." Other diners had begun to notice the confrontation. Conversations at nearby tables grew quieter as people tried to listen without appearing to eavesdrop. The discomfort in the room was palpable, but so far everyone was following the unspoken rule of not getting involved in someone else's business. Maria returned with a fresh glass of water, no ice, and set it carefully in front of the man. "Here you are, sir. Again, I apologize for the confusion." "Confusion?" the man said, his tone dripping with disdain. "This isn't confusion. It's incompetence. And frankly, I'm not sure why this establishment employs people who clearly aren't suited for customer service. Maybe you'd be more comfortable in the kitchen, where your English skills wouldn't be as much of a liability." Katt felt his hands clench involuntarily. The comment was barely disguised racism, wrapped in the language of customer complaints but designed to humiliate Maria in front of the entire restaurant. Maria's professional composure remained intact, but Katt could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her hands, as she straightened the silverware on the table with unnecessary precision. "I understand your frustration, sir," she said quietly. "Is there anything else I can bring you this evening?" "What you can bring me," the man said, leaning back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone who enjoyed wielding power over others, "is a server who speaks English as their first language and understands what customer service means in this country." The woman across from him shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Richard, maybe we should just—" "No, Jennifer," Richard interrupted. "This is exactly the problem with businesses today. They lower their standards to accommodate people who shouldn't be in these positions in the first place." The restaurant had gone almost completely silent now. Even the kitchen seemed quieter, as if the entire establishment was holding its breath. Maria stood frozen beside the table, her professional mask finally beginning to crack, as the full weight of the public humiliation settled on her. That's when Katt Williams had heard enough. He stood up from his corner table and walked purposefully across the dining room. Every eye in the restaurant followed his movement, though most diners probably didn't recognize him in the dim lighting. "Excuse me," Katt said, approaching table 12 with the calm confidence of someone who had faced down hecklers in comedy clubs for decades. Richard looked up, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Can I help you?" "Actually, I think I can help you," Katt replied, his voice carrying just loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear clearly. "I've been sitting over there for the past half hour, and I've watched this young lady provide some of the most professional service I've ever seen. She's knowledgeable, courteous, and efficient. I don't see how this is any of your business," Richard said, his tone suggesting he was used to intimidating people into backing down. "You made it my business when you decided to have this conversation loud enough for everyone in the restaurant to hear." Katt replied calmly, "See, I've been coming to this restaurant for years, and Maria here has served me before. She speaks at least 2 languages fluently. She knows this menu better than most people know their own neighborhood. And she treats every customer with respect, even when they don't deserve it." Richard's face was beginning to redden, but Katt wasn't finished. "Now, I couldn't help but notice that you've been complaining about everything from her accent to her competence. But from where I'm sitting, the only problem at this table is your behavior." "Who do you think you are?" Richard demanded, starting to rise from his seat. "I'm someone who recognizes good people when I see them," Katt replied, "and I'm someone who thinks a man who treats hardworking people like garbage says a lot more about his character than theirs." The tension in the room was electric. Other diners had stopped even pretending to eat, completely absorbed in the confrontation playing out before them. "Maria," Katt said, turning to address her directly, "how long have you been working here?" 3 years, Maria replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "And in those 3 years, how many complaints have you received about your service?" Maria looked confused by the question. "I don't know, very few, maybe 2 or 3. "Richard," Katt said, turning back to the businessman, "in your professional life, what's your complaint-to-success ratio? Because I'm betting it's nowhere near as good as Maria's." Richard's companion, Jennifer, was now actively trying to get him to leave. "Richard, we should go," she said quietly. But Richard's pride wouldn't let him back down. "I don't have to listen to this from some what?" Katt interrupted, his voice taking on a steel edge that made several people in the restaurant sit up straight. "Go ahead, finish that sentence. Tell everyone what you really think about people who don't look like you or sound like you." The challenge hung in the air like a dare. Richard clearly wanted to say more, but he was smart enough to realize that whatever came out of his mouth next would likely be recorded by the dozen phones that were now discreetly pointed in their direction. "Here's what's going to happen," Katt said, his voice returning to its conversational tone, but still carrying complete authority. "You're going to apologize to Maria for treating her disrespectfully. Then you're going to pay your bill, leave a generous tip, and walk out of here with what's left of your dignity." "I'm not apologizing to anyone," Richard said. but his voice lacked conviction now. Then let me put it another way, Katt replied. You see, I have about 2 million followers on social media, and they tend to be very interested in how people treat service workers. Now, I could post about this encounter, complete with the name of your company that's printed on your business cards there on the table, and let them draw their own conclusions about your character. Richard's face went pale as he followed Katt's gaze to the business cards that were indeed visible on the table. Or, Katt continued, you could do the right thing, apologize to this hardworking professional, and we can all go back to enjoying our evening. The restaurant was so quiet that the sound of the air conditioning seemed loud. Everyone waited to see how Richard would respond. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Richard looked at Maria. I apologize, he said stiffly. I was frustrated, and I spoke inappropriately. It wasn't a great apology, but it was something. Thank you, Maria said graciously, proving once again that her character was far superior to his. Richard threw several bills on the table, more than enough to cover the meal and a substantial tip, and left with Jennifer, who nodded apologetically to Maria as they passed. As soon as they were gone, the restaurant erupted in spontaneous applause. Several other diners approached Maria to express their support and admiration for how she'd handled the situation. Katt returned to his table, where his meal was waiting, still perfectly warm. A few minutes later, Maria approached his table, tears in her eyes but a genuine smile on her face. Thank you, she said simply. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Katt replied. Nobody deserves to be treated that way, especially someone who takes pride in their work like you do. Can I ask why? Maria said. Why you stood up for me? Katt thought for a moment before answering. Because I've been where you are. I've had people dismiss me, disrespect me, and act like I was less than human because of where I came from, or how I sounded. And I swore that if I ever had the power to stand up for someone else in that situation, I would. Maria wiped her eyes and smiled. Well, you made a difference tonight. Not just for me but for everyone watching. 6 months later, Maria Santos was promoted to assistant manager at Romano's. The restaurant had implemented new policies to protect staff from abusive customers, and Maria had become something of a local legend for her grace under pressure during what staff now called the Katt Williams incident. She sent Katt a photo from her graduation ceremony, when she completed her business degree, something she'd been working toward for years while serving tables. In the note she wrote, "Thank you for reminding me that I deserve respect, and for showing me what real strength looks like." Katt kept that photo as a reminder that sometimes the most important performances happen not on stage, but in moments when someone's dignity is under attack, and you have the power to defend it. So now I ask you, have you ever been Maria, standing there taking abuse you didn't deserve while others looked away? Or have you been one of the customers who witnessed injustice but stayed silent, unsure whether it was your place to intervene? Share that moment in the comments. Let others know about the time when someone stood up for you, or when you found the courage to speak up for what's right. Because at Visionary Story, we believe that respect isn't earned through wealth or status. It's something every hardworking person deserves. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to say, "This is wrong," to remind everyone what human dignity looks like. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, subscribe, share, and help us keep these voices alive. We'll see you in the next one. And until then, remember, if you ever see someone being treated with cruelty disguised as customer complaints, maybe you're looking at a moment when you can be someone's hero.